According to a recent investigation by the Intercept, the Department of Homeland Security is quietly expanding efforts to censor speech it considers dangerous on various tech platforms. According to the Capstone report, the department plans to target inaccurate information on topics that include the origin of COVID, vaccine efficacy, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the U.S. support of Ukraine.
The Intercept's investigation was spearheaded by Ken Klippenstein and Lee Fang. Lee discussed the findings on Tucker Carlson Monday night. Let's listen to some of that.
The story also just looks at the mission creep of DHS. This is an agency that was founded in the aftermath of 9/11 to combat foreign terror threats of Al-Qaeda and the like. But over the last 5 years, it's kind of evolved in its mission. It's moved towards fighting disinfo, and their justification is, disinformation radicalizes the homeland. It can lead to disruptions in public health or in political violence. So they have a justification. We have these documents, and they're pushing forward with this broad censorship agenda.
Joining us now to expand on their findings is investigative reporter at The Intercept, Ken Klippenstein. Welcome, Ken.
Hey, good to be with you guys.
All right, so we saw a kind of disinformation effort crash and burn earlier this year. There were musical lyrics involved. There was a lot of tomfoolery, and it seemed like unwinding that plan showed a little bit of insight on the behalf of the Biden administration that at least the way that they were going about doing it wasn't flying for the public. What in this reporting indicates, if at all, that there is an understanding that the public doesn't basically trust what the government will and will not consider to be information? Is there any disinformation, rather? Is there any transparency involved in anything that you've looked at that would give people any assurances that we're not headed down the same rabbit hole?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of this is being done in private in the form of biweekly meetings between some of the biggest tech giants like Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and officials from not just the Department of Homeland Security, but the FBI and other federal agencies as well. Now, what the agencies say is we're not requiring any of this. We're just issuing recommendations, and the government can act on that. While that's technically true, I think that's a little misleading, if only because these same companies are lobbying the federal government for preferential treatment. And so I imagine they're not going to want to antagonize that same government that they're relying on for whatever it is they're lobbying them for. So these biweekly meetings have taken place as recently as this summer. That doesn't mean that they're not still taking place. I imagine that they are. That's just what I have the most recent evidence for. And, some of this was public. It's not secret that under the Department of Homeland Security's child agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they had established something called the MDM team, which stands for the Misinformation, Disinformation, and Malinformation team that is designed to interface, as the documents that I was provided shows, interface with these different private tech platforms to discuss with them what they think represents dangerous information.
Right, and obviously this is, related. We've seen a lot of this kind of thing with, with the administration, actually even within the White House, right, communicating to social media platforms, specifically on COVID topics. Alex Berenson, who was banned from, as a kind of anti-vaccine voice, was banned from Twitter and then later reinstated, and has shared lots of documents showing, emails from Biden, White House people to the social media companies that are right there, right at that line, because they know it would violate the First Amendment to explicitly say we are ordering you to take down this speech or take down this person. So instead it's this push. Well, we would like you to do it. This would be better, et cetera. You see, so what DHS is doing is, I think, related to that, but in some ways even more nefarious because it's being done under the auspices, like Lee suggested in that discussion with Tucker, of kind of national security creep and national security overreach.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one thing that's important to stress, I think there's been a lot of efforts to kind of twist this story into a sort of partisan one, and not that it doesn't, have political dimensions, but this disinformation effort on the part of DHS began in 2018 under the Trump administration. And so I think the seeds of this were the 2016 Russia disinformation. And so DHS comes to the federal government in Congress saying, hey, so you guys have a disinformation and election problems. So we've got midterms coming up in 2018. Let us play some role in this so that 2016 doesn't happen again. And that's really where it begins in 2018. And it certainly, accelerated and intensified under the Biden administration. But what it first started out as is a elections disinformation response. And if you look at the names of some of these agencies, the MDM team that I mentioned before was originally called the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force, and the FBI has a similarly named task force that they have working on these things. So what we're seeing really come 2020 is its expansion to encompass coronavirus disinformation. And then now under the Biden administration, as you mentioned, it seems to be expanding further.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to always make, given all this Republican complaining about what social media policies are, and then what the Biden administration is pushing them to do. Complaints that I think are totally legitimate, but the conservatives, when in power, totally blew their opportunity to unwind some of these security programs, to lessen the reach, to rein in these agencies. That conservatives are now very mad at these agencies, but made absolutely no effort to hold them back when they had the opportunity to do so.
Exactly. It seems like censorship is one of those things that when you're in power, suddenly your compunctions kind of disappear. And so my hope is that people will view this in a nonpartisan lens and just see that this can be turned at all sorts of different subjects, and indeed is.
Well, hope is one might that happens. Lee's appearance on Tucker sparked some major online backlash, especially from the left. I personally think that this story should be covered on every major outlet. It's a huge story, but we saw a lot of folks characterizing it as a right-wing story simply because Lee went on Tucker. I got to ask you, have you gotten offers to go on other ideologically diverse outlets other than this one?
Actually, yeah, although the sort of mainstream media coverage has been a lot less than like the popularity on independent outlets would suggest, which is funny to me because so much of the story was based on primary source documents. It's not like we're, I do have some anonymous sources, but that's just to give color to it. All of this is stuff that you can look at the underlying documents and corroborate for yourself. So there's no question as to the authenticity of it. I wonder if, it's a question of what I said before, that, when one party's in power, that group tends not to care about questions of speech.
Yeah, it's interesting that I do have the sense that the mainstream media has been much less interested in this category of story right now, the pressure from government figures onto social media, onto platforms about these topics. And I have to think part of that is because of what seems to be a tremendous intellectual or philosophical buy-in to the idea that policing bad speech on social media is really good, and if the government is assisting platforms in doing it, that's A plus. That seems to be a perspective that I encounter within the mainstream media. A lot of mainstream media outlets have disinformation reporters now that it looks to me are not just calling out actual cases of bad information, but take a kind of apocalyptic, oh no, what if somebody sees this? This has to be gotten rid of because it is itself some kind of virus that is contagious. So that kind of thing. Am I off on that, or have you noticed that as well?
No, I think you're right. I mean, this is much bigger than a White House thing. Everybody wants to make this a Trump thing or a Biden thing. Mm-hmm. The reality is this is probably a society-wide thing, and it's a national security story. So a lot of this is happening at the administrative level within these agencies that I wouldn't be surprised if, either of the two White Houses that presided over this were aware of the full extent of what was going on. And I wonder if this reflects the shifting attitudes within the country. I looked at some polling very recently that showed that during the coronavirus pandemic, a really surprising amount of Americans, at least in the poll, expressed support for taking down what they consider disinformation about COVID. And so when the public opinion shifts like that, the national security state, they pay attention to these things and they realize, okay, this gives us some more space to expand our own authorities. And so my impression is that a lot of this is happening at the administrative level, and it's not this sort of partisan thing, at least not to the extent that people think it is.
That's scary stuff. I appreciate your being here today and covering this important story.
Thanks so much, guys.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.